The HOA fined me for running a business out of my home. But what they didn't realize, the entire HOA on paper was still registered under my name. They tried to shut me down. So I shut them down first. I've lived in my neighborhood for over 6 years. Quiet streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and the occasional overzealous HOA email, that was the extent of the drama. Until recently, when all hell broke loose. Over a few packages it started. On a Thursday morning, I was sipping my coffee on the front porch when a white sedan from the HOA rolled up and parked right in front of my house. Out stepped Carl, the HOA vice president, clipboard in hand and that smug little smirk I'd come to associate with passive-aggressive rule enforcement. "Good morning," he said too cheerily. "We've noticed an unusual increase in parcel deliveries to your address." I blinked, confused. "You mean my Amazon packages?" Carl chuckled in that fake way bureaucrats do when they're about to ruin your day. "Well, it's not just Amazon. UPS, FedEx, local couriers multiple times a day, almost daily for the last 2 months. The board has reason to believe you're running a business out of your home, which, as you know, is a violation of Section 4, Paragraph B of the HOA bylaws." I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. Yes, I had started a small eBay reselling gig a couple of months ago, just part-time. It was nothing major, mostly electronics and collectibles I flipped for profit. I didn't have signage, I didn't have customers coming in and out, and I definitely wasn't disturbing anyone. But apparently, Carl and the HOA thought otherwise. "I'm not running a full business," I tried to explain. "It's just an online thing. I work from home. It's quiet." "No one's even noticed until now." Carl raised an eyebrow. "We noticed. And more importantly, the rule states, no commercial activity that affects the residential character of the property. That includes regular shipping and receiving." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "So I can't get packages now?" "Not that volume," he said smugly. "The board will be issuing a fine of $500 for non-compliance. You'll receive the notice by tomorrow." Before I could say anything else, he turned around and strutted back to his car like he'd just delivered a verdict from the Supreme Court. Was stunned. A fine? For getting deliveries? That night, I pulled up the HOA bylaws. Sure enough, buried in the legal jargon was a vague clause about prohibited commercial activity. It was intentionally unclear, just ambiguous enough that they could bend it whenever they wanted. Over the next week, the packages kept coming, as they always did, and so did the HOA notices. One, then another, each one more aggressive than the last. They were escalating the fines $500, $750, $1,000, claiming I hadn't ceased my business operations. It became clear this wasn't just about rules. This was personal. Someone on the board, probably Carl, had it out for me. Then it got worse. One morning, I woke up to find a bright red notice taped to my door. "Final warning. Cease all business. Activity immediately or face legal action." I laughed out loud. Legal action? For reselling on eBay? I started to wonder, how much power does this HOA actually have? So I decided to dig. If they wanted to play legal hardball, I'd do my homework. I started by requesting a copy of the HOA's Articles of Incorporation in public, registration documents from the county clerk's office. That's when things took a very unexpected turn. As I read through the dusty paperwork, something caught my eye, something that didn't make sense at first. Under registered agent and founder, it listed my name. I blinked. Then reread it. There it was, clear as day. The HOA was originally filed and registered by me. Now, a little backstory. When I first moved into the neighborhood 6 years ago, the HOA was barely functioning. No board, no rules, no structure. Just a vague name and some dusty paperwork. At the time, the developer asked if I wanted to help set it up properly. I agreed and submitted a basic registration to help form an official HOA structure something I completely forgot about. Apparently, no one ever changed the original registration, and no one refiled or updated the founding documents, which meant, legally, I was still the registered owner and controlling party of the HOA. My jaw dropped. The same group that was threatening me, fining me, and treating me like an outsider was doing so under an organization still legally tied to me. Oh, this was about to get interesting. I knew I had to play this smart. I couldn't go in guns blazing yet. First, I needed to gather all the proof. The filing date, the registration history, any amendments or lack thereof. I printed everything, highlighted it, and tucked it away. Carl and the board had no idea they were picking a fight with someone who technically was the HOA. They wanted to accuse me of running a business? Fine, I was about to run theirs. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the fine notice, my fingers drumming against the edge of the envelope. The amount printed in bold red ink made me snort. $1,250. They'd added a repeat offense fee, whatever that meant, and threatened to refer me to the HOA's legal counsel if I didn't pay within 7 days. I wasn't just annoyed anymore. I was insulted. It wasn't about the money. I could have paid it. I wasn't rich, but this wasn't going to bankrupt me. What bothered me was the tone of it, the arrogance, the assumption that they had absolute control over me when the truth was they didn't even know who they were messing with. Still, I kept my cool. No angry emails, no confrontations. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I went quiet, let them think they were winning. But in the background, I was gathering evidence, printing public records, and slowly putting together a strategy. I started by reviewing every single page of the HOA's bylaws and corporate filings. It was like a digital archaeological dig. There were contradictions everywhere, rules about fines that didn't match state guidelines, procedures for hearings that had never been followed, even expired addresses on legal documents. It was a mess. And somehow, the mess was still legally tied to my name. Here's what I discovered that really made me pause. The HOA had never filed a change of registered agent. In the eyes of the state, I was still the point of contact, still the legal representative, and in some obscure bureaucratic twist, still had the right to amend or even dissolve the HOA entirely, at least on paper. How had this gone unnoticed? For 6 years? Because no one bothers to look at the paperwork. Most HOA board members are volunteers with minimal knowledge of how nonprofits actually work. They assume things are set up and maintained by someone else. But in this case, they'd inherited a legal shell built on my name and never thought to check the foundation. And now that shell was cracking. Despite knowing all this, I still wasn't 100% sure how I wanted to play it. I didn't want to nuke the neighborhood or start a war just to prove a point. But I also wasn't going to roll over and take their threats. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting in person, see who I was really dealing with, now that I had the upper hand. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a modest space usually reserved for birthday parties and potlucks. When I walked in, the board was already seated behind a long folding table. Carl sat in the center like he was some kind of emperor. Beside him were Karen, the actual name of the secretary, ironically, and a few other residents who mostly looked like they wished they were home watching TV. I signed in and sat down in the front row. Carl noticed me immediately. "Oh," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Walker, here to discuss your ongoing violation, I presume?" "Something like that," I replied with a neutral smile. He tapped his pen on his clipboard. "Well, as noted in the letters, your operation constitutes a clear breach of HOA policy. The board has reviewed the situation and the fines will remain in place. Unless you're here to pay them, there's not much to discuss." I waited for him to finish. The smugness in his tone made my stomach churn, but I didn't react. "Actually," I said, pulling out a manila folder and placing it gently on the table in front of me, "I wanted to ask the board a few questions on the record." Carl blinked. This isn't really a Q&A." "Understood," I said, "but I think you'll want to hear this." I opened the folder and started laying out the documents. The original HOA filing with my name and signature, the official state registry showing me as the current registered agent, and an unbroken chain of legal paperwork proving that no amendments or updates had ever been submitted. "This," I said, pointing to the top page, "is the legal registration of the HOA. Notice the name of the founding party?" Carl leaned in and squinted. His face changed. Karen slowly reached for the paper, then looked up at me. "This can't be." "Right," she said quietly. "Oh, it's very right," I replied calmly. "I was the original filer when the community developer asked for volunteers to set up the HOA 6 years ago. I never rescinded that position. And according to the state, this HOA is still legally operating under the name and signature of me." Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Carl tried to regain his composure. "Even if that's true, the board operates independently now. We were elected, and yet," I interrupted, "you never updated the official documents." "Which means you're collecting fines and enforcing rules under an organization that hasn't legally transferred authority. That's a violation of nonprofit corporate law. In fact, if I really wanted to press it, I could shut this whole thing down today." Dead silence. I let that sink in for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. "But I'm not here to do that. Yet. I just want to make something very clear. If you continue to find me, harass me, or accuse me without due process, I'll take full legal control back, and this board won't just be disbanded, it'll be liable for misrepresentation. Fraud." Carl's face had drained of color. Karen looked like she'd seen a ghost. A few of the other board members suddenly became very interested in the floor tiles. "I recommend," I added, "that the board immediately cancels any outstanding fines against me and begins the process of either formally transferring authority or giving me a seat at the table." Nobody responded. Carl simply nodded stiffly, then looked at the others. "Motion to adjourn?" He mumbled, "Seconded." Karen whispered, and with that, the meeting dissolved like cotton candy in water. After that meeting, the HOA board went eerily silent. No more fine notices, no more emails. Not even a passive-aggressive flyer on my doorstep. I had rattled the cage, and now the snakes were hiding, but I knew they were still coiled up, watching me. That silence only lasted a week. On the 8th day, I received a certified letter in the mail. This time, it wasn't from Carl or the HOA board, it was from a law firm, a real one. A cease and desist order claiming that I had illegally interfered in the functioning of a duly elected homeowners association, and that my claims of ownership were false and constituted fraudulent misrepresentation. Now that got my attention. It was laughable at first, but it meant one thing: Carl and his crew had panicked. Instead of checking the facts and admitting their mistake, they went full scorched earth and brought in lawyers hoping they could scare me into backing off. Bad move, because now I had legal documents in my hand too. And more importantly, I had time and a reason to go deeper. So I did. I spent the next 3 nights combing through county databases, nonprofit registries, HOA tax records, even local meeting minutes. What I found wasn't just a smoking gun, it was a burning file cabinet full of gasoline. First, I pulled the HOAS IRS Form 990 filings required for nonprofit associations. The most recent one was nearly 4 years old. That was a problem. HOAs are supposed to file annually, and skipping multiple years can result in automatic revocation of nonprofit status. Then I checked the financial records filed with the State Housing Commission. And this is where things got sketchy. The HOA was reporting membership dues income around $80,000 a year, but no contractor payments, no maintenance expenses, and no legal fees. Just a vague line item labeled operational costs, $72,500, which meant two things. They weren't properly accounting for expenses. Or worse, they were hiding something. So I pulled the vendor records, and there it was, Carl's name, Carl J. Henley Enterprises, LLC, listed as a landscaping vendor paid monthly by the HOA. Landscaping. But here's the kicker. There was no actual landscaping happening in the neighborhood. We had a single contracted guy named Miguel who mowed common areas every 2 weeks, and I personally paid him once when the HOA was late. So what the hell was Carl's LLC getting paid for? I contacted Miguel and asked him straight up, "Carl?" Miguel laughed. "He's never paid me anything." "You did? Remember?" I remembered. That's when it clicked. Carl had created a fake business, billed the HOA for services, and paid himself. It was fraud. Simple and ugly, but it didn't stop there. Karen, our lovely secretary, was listed as the consultant for several HOA administrative restructuring services. Payments went to an email-registered shell company tied to her maiden name. These were payments of $1,500 a month, just enough to fly under the radar. But over time, it added up to tens of thousands. They weren't just enforcing rules for control anymore, they were lining their pockets with HOA money. And guess who still held the legal registration for the entire HOA? Me, which meant their shady dealings were operating under my name. Now this wasn't just about revenge. This was about clearing my name, because if this fraud came to light and the state started asking questions, I'd be the first one under the microscope. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer the next day, a real one, someone who specialized in HOA law and corporate governance. I brought every document, every filing, every copy of checks and payments I'd uncovered. She looked through it all in stunned silence. "You're telling me," she said finally, "that this entire HOA is still registered under your name, and they've been using it to commit financial fraud?" I nodded. "And they sent you a cease and desist?" "Yep." She leaned back and exhaled. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. If you wanted, you could file a claim against them for defamation, misuse of corporate identity, and demand full access to the HOA's bank accounts and operational history. Would I win? With the evidence you've got? She said, easily, but I wasn't ready to go nuclear. Not yet. Instead, I asked her to help me draft a legal notice, one that would shake the board hard enough to feel it, but not destroy the community in the process. Here's what it said. In essence, to the current acting members of the neighborhood name, Homeowners Association, this letter serves as formal notification that the current HOA remains legally registered under the original articles filed by my full name and has not been lawfully amended or reassigned. Furthermore, documented evidence suggests misuse of HOA funds by current board members. Unless immediate action is taken to suspend all fines against the undersigned, provide full financial transparency, and initiate an emergency re-registration and election, legal proceedings will begin within 10 business days. I sent it to each board member. Certified mail. Then I waited. 3 days passed. Silence. On the fourth day, Carl showed up at my house. No clipboard this time. Just a nervous expression. And a sweaty brow. "Can we talk?" he asked. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Sure. Want to talk about the fake landscaping business or the payments to Corinne's shell company first?" His face went pale. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't mean to fraudulently pocket HOA money? Or didn't mean to do it under my name?" He didn't answer. I stepped aside and opened the door. "You've got 5 minutes. After that, we do this in court." Carl stepped inside like a man walking into a courtroom, not because he wanted to, but because he knew it was the only option left. His shoulders were slumped, eyes darting around the living room like he was expecting hidden cameras. I offered him no seat, no water, and definitely no kindness. This was business now, so I said flatly, "You got my letter?" He nodded slowly. "Look, I didn't know the HOA was still registered under you." "Didn't know?" "You threatened me with legal action using my own paperwork," I snapped. "That tells me either you're dangerously stupid or deliberately corrupt. Neither one makes you fit to run this HOA." Carl opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but then closed it. He knew. I had him cornered, and no HOA rules or made-up fines were going to save him now. You and your little inner circle siphoned money through fake vendors, issued illegal fines, ignored the legal filings, and now you're realizing the entire structure you built sits on a foundation with my name chiseled into it. I said, "You don't run this HOA, Carl." "I do." He rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "What do you want?" "Glad you asked," I said, flipping open a folder already sitting on the coffee table. "There are 3 things that are going to happen immediately." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the papers as I slid them across the table. "Number 1, I said, "you resign from the board. Effective immediately. No more public position, no backroom influence. You're done." Carl looked like he wanted to protest, but I raised a finger. "Number 2. You give me full access to the HOA's bank accounts, vendor contracts, board minutes, and all financial records for the past 5 years. I'm not going to the authorities yet, but I will be doing a full audit. If I find anything else, well, you know what happens next." He nodded reluctantly. "And number 3? He asked. "Number 3, I said with a smile. "You help me announce an emergency re-election for the entire HOA board, every seat, including mine. We let the community vote for who they actually want running things. No more secret appointments. No more puppet shows. Fair vote. Transparent leadership." Carl leaned back and sighed. "You're not going to just take over?" "I could," I admitted. "The law is on my side. But I'm not trying to run a kingdom, Carl. I want this neighborhood to be fair for everyone." For a moment, I saw the flash of the man Carl might have been before the power trips, before the corruption. Maybe he'd just gotten too comfortable being in control. Or maybe he was always this way and just finally got caught. Either way, it didn't matter. "You agree to those terms," I continued, "and I won't file fraud charges. I won't take this to the county. I won't burn this whole board to the ground." He nodded slowly. "Okay, deal." "Good," I said. "You've got 48 hours to get me access to the records and draft the resignation letter. I'll handle the rest." By the next evening, I had everything I needed. Carl's resignation came in via email, along with a scanned signature and a brief "thank you" for the opportunity note that tried to make it sound like his idea. I didn't care how he spun it as long as he was out. More importantly, I now had full access to the HOA's accounts. And what I saw confirmed what I already suspected: thousands of dollars in vendor fees to Carl's fake landscaping LLC, duplicate charges for consulting services from Corinne's shell company, and multiple cash withdrawals labeled petty expenses with no receipts or paper trails. It was textbook embezzlement. Called my lawyer and asked a question I already knew the answer to. If I submitted this to the district attorney's office, would they prosecute? Absolutely, she said. Especially since it's tied to your name and you were never notified of the mismanagement. Okay, I said. Then let's give them one last chance to walk away clean before this goes public. The next day, I drafted a letter to the remaining board members, Karen included. I attached a full report of the financial audit and a cover letter that read, "You have 72 hours to resign, turn over access, and agree to a full community re-election process. If not, this report will be sent to the county prosecutor's office and made available to every homeowner in the neighborhood." I hit send. 12 hours later, Karen resigned. The next morning, the treasurer did too. By the end of the third day, every board member had stepped down, some quietly, others with long-winded excuses about health or family obligations. Not one of them dared challenge me, because they knew they'd built their little empire on my name and I'd just reclaimed the throne. With the board gone, I scheduled a community meeting in the same clubhouse where they'd once dismissed me. This time, it was standing room only. Neighbors came out of the woodwork, many of them shocked, some angry, all curious. I stood at the front with a projector and a simple presentation, a breakdown of what the old board had done, how they'd been caught, and what we were going to do next. I didn't name call. I didn't gloat. I just laid out the facts and gave people one thing the HOA hadn't provided in years: transparency. Then I announced the emergency election. Every homeowner was invited to vote or run for a position. We'd have an independent election committee, open financial records, and for the first time in years, real accountability. People clapped. Some cheered. A few even thanked me personally. One elderly neighbor walked up, took my hand, and said, "About time someone fixed this mess." As I walked home that night, I finally felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. I hadn't planned for any of this. I didn't set out to take down the HOA or run a mini government in my neighborhood. But when they tried to crush me over a few packages, they'd awakened a side of me they weren't ready for. And now? Now I was ready to build something better. When the re-election ballots came in, it was clear the neighborhood had spoken and they were done with the old regime. Out of 214 eligible homeowners, 193 participated in the emergency vote. That was unheard of. People who'd never shown up for a barbecue or Halloween potluck were suddenly showing up, talking about bylaw reform and budget transparency. The energy was electric. And when the results were announced, I was voted in as the president of the HOA with 94% of the vote. To be honest, I didn't expect to win by that margin. I thought I'd be one of 5 board members, maybe take a position behind the scenes. But the neighborhood didn't want more silence. They wanted someone who had already stood up to the PIA corruption and dragged it into the light. So I accepted. And with that, I officially went from the guy who got fined over a few packages to the legal head of the very organization that tried to destroy me. The first thing I did was hold a public forum. No closed-door sessions. No hushed conversations in a clubhouse hallway. I stood up in front of everyone and laid out exactly what had happened. Over $70,000 in HOA funds had been funneled into fake businesses and unverifiable consulting services. The board had failed to file critical IRS forms for years, risking nonprofit status. They had used my name legally and wrongfully to carry out the whole operation. When I showed the community members the actual filings, stamped with dates, signatures, and dollar amounts, mouths dropped. Even some of Carl's old supporters couldn't defend him anymore. Then I did what nobody expected. Offered full amnesty. That's right. No lawsuits, no criminal charges, no scorched earth revenge. I told the neighborhood I had the evidence to pursue every former board member in court. But doing that would cost time, energy, and money. It would divide us. Make our neighborhood the next viral HOA horror story on YouTube. And worst of all, it would slow down the one thing we all actually wanted: progress. If they stay gone, I said, we move forward. Together. The vote was unanimous. The residents agreed. We left the corruption in the past and started building a future. Now, let's talk about what changed. Within a month, we launched HOA Transparency Online, a portal where every resident could log in, see the budget, access documents, track meeting minutes, and submit concerns anonymously. Suddenly, the mysterious world of HOA decisions was cracked open like a window, and people loved it. We also hired a real property manager, an external professional, not someone's cousin's nephew who mowed lawns on the side. They helped renegotiate all vendor contracts, saving us over $12,000 in the first quarter alone. Then we tackled the rules. The old board used to throw fines around like confetti. Park the wrong way on the street, $1.75. Trash can out before 6 a.m., $100. Host a family birthday party in your backyard with more than 5 guests, $150. All of that gone. We rewrote the community guidelines with resident input, focusing on real issues: property damage, late dues, common area violations. Not petty nonsense like package deliveries or quiet online side hustles. People finally felt like they lived in a neighborhood, not a prison yard run by retirees on power trips. And Carl? Well, Carl moved out. After resigning, he quietly sold his house and disappeared. No goodbye, no apology. Just gone. Karen did the same shortly after. I won't lie, I was tempted to file a formal complaint with the county, maybe even push for restitution. But in the end, I realized their punishment wasn't a fine or a court case. Their punishment was losing the power they clung to so tightly. Few weeks after everything settled down, I got a knock on my door. It was Miguel, the guy who used to mow the lawn before the HOA stiffed him. Hey man, he said with a grin. Heard you're the new boss. Something like that, I said. He pulled out an envelope. You paid me once when the HOA didn't. I didn't forget that. Here's the invoice for this month, real one. No markup, no games. I took it, smiled, and shook his hand. Let's work together this time. Now here's the twist I never expected. I actually enjoy this role, not because I like power, but because, for the first time, I'm using it the right way. I've seen what happens when it's abused, and I know how easy it is for people to fall into the trap of secrecy, fines, and micromanagement. But it doesn't have to be that way, sometimes. The HOA can be the villain in a story, but sometimes it can be the hero. You just have to put the right person in charge. So what did I learn from all this? Always read the fine print. That little form I signed 6 years ago, it ended up saving my reputation and gave me the leverage to clean house. Bullies bluff. When Carl brought in lawyers, he was counting on me backing down. But bullies don't expect you to fight with facts. Power is temporary, but paperwork is forever. Carl thought he ran the HOA. The state thought I did. And that made all the difference. Community wins every time. When people are given a voice and treated like adults, they show up. They vote. They build something better. Today, our HOA isn't perfect, but it's transparent, fair, and accountable. We have monthly potlucks again. Neighbors wave at each other. Kids ride bikes on the sidewalk without someone demanding helmet permits. People feel safe, in control, free. And all because the HOA fined me for running a business, without realizing that legally they were the business I owned all along.